Hudson Valley Knits Podcast. I am Amy, your host. I am podcasting to you today from my bedroom because it has been raining for the past 2 weekends. Last weekend, you'll know I did podcast outside in the rain for you folks, and it was under a gazebo, so I kind of got away with it, but you really couldn't see the river behind me. I was right out along the river, but you couldn't tell. But this weekend, it rained all day Saturday and Sunday. Today is Sunday. And so I had to podcast because I have some finished objects to show you that are gifts that I will be giving away, and I wanted to show you them before I give them away. And I will go over my progress. I also am kind of deviating from my normal ways of working. I wanted to talk about stranded knitting. I am jumping on the wagon. Anyway, today is Sunday. It is February 23rd? 5th. Oh my goodness, I was way off. It's February 25th already. My goodness, time is flying. Have you been watching the Olympics? I have I have 2 Ravelinic projects that I finished, and that's what I'm going to show you. Did I say this is episode 95? And did I say thank you so much for those of you that watch my podcast? I love that you watch my podcast. I love sharing my passion and knowledge of knitting. I've been knitting since I was a little girl, and I've always loved it. I've not always been able to afford it, but I've always loved it, and I love to talk about it. So thank you for coming. So my first finished project is the Coastal Walk Shawl by Joji Locatelli. Let me show you the right side. This is knit in old wool sport weight yarn. I didn't weave in the 2 ends yet, so bear with me. Let me put that on the other side. There it is. The colorway is, what's the colorway again? Isn't it beautiful though? I have some leftovers right here actually. The bull thistle. I have this much left over. So this pattern called for 500 yards of sport weight yarn. So I bought 2 of these. They're 336 yards each. It's 100% organic superwash merino wool, organically dyed and organically superwashed. Oh, wool. I know other podcasters have been talking about wool. I think the buzz is starting to get around because it's also super affordable. $15.99 for a 100 gram skein. So that's the yarn. If I had known I would have had so much left over, I would have, first of all, I would have knit and I would have gone down a needle size because I think I would have liked you could see me through the garter stitch. I would have liked the gauge a little tighter and squishier. Just because it would make the shawl a little warmer, and I think the lace part would still have popped through. The other thing is I would have done, so there's the lace chart is 60 rows, and you do 60 rows and then you do the first 30 rows again, and then you do the garter stitch border. I would have done again, just looking back, I would have done the rest of the chart. I would have done 60 rows twice, and that would have made the garter band longer because you basically start on this side. You can see there's a lot more garter on this side, and you keep doing it in the short rows until you get to the end. So it would have made probably a good couple of inches more of the garter stitch, and I probably would have had enough yarn. So this is going to my friend Lena's mom. Again, I told you she kind of suffers from depression, and I wanted to give her something made from love, made from the heart, to comfort her. And that's why I call it a prayer shawl for Nanny. I call her Nanny. Everybody calls her Nanny. And every time I picked it up, I said a prayer for her. And my husband was going to bring it up. My husband, I think I've mentioned before, he's not currently working there, but he will be soon, a chef at a monastery. So he has a relationship with all the friars, and he's had special items blessed for people before he's gone to them. And I was going to ask him to bless this, have one of the friars bless this for his mom, but I ended up not doing that. So happy with this. I want to make another one and do those additional changes sometime soon. Maybe not this year, because I have enough in my queue for this year. So this was cast on during the open ceremonies. This is my official Ravelinix project. I'm not on any team. And most of this was knit in front of the TV watching the Olympics after I said my prayer. And I put together a little lavender sachet to gift that to her with. So that's one of the things. So then I had all this time on my hands, and I'm going to sneeze. All right, back. I think this is where. All right, sorry, I had to edit out a sneezing attack. All right, so I was on Facebook, and I'm friends with Emily Straw, who used to do the Butterfly Knits Podcast, an audio podcast, and I'm sure you've all heard of her. And she posted on Facebook, and I was at work sharing this with the gentleman, the guy that sits behind me. His name is LJ. I started laughing. He's like, "What's so funny?" He comes over, and I showed him Emily's post where she said, number one, I am going to knit this hat for my husband. And number two, before you even ask if you can have one, if I will knit you one, the answer is yes. But you will have to pay me $195. And she posts a link to the Ralph Lauren website, who designed the knitting hats for the Olympic team. And I use the word design loosely because it's a very, very, standard is not the word I'm looking for, but it's it's just a classic stitch pattern hat. It's not much design going into it. It's so she posted a link to it. She did make a hat, and he's like, "Wow, I would love a hat like that." And I'm like, "Well, I'll knit you one. Do you want one? I'll knit you one." He's and the reason why I would do it for him for free is because he's a former U.S. Marine. He served our country, and if I can give back, I do it happily. And he said he'd pay for the yarn, so that's cool too. But I knit him this. This is the free pattern by Susan Rainey. Actually, that's the back where you're going to see the jogs. Here's the front. And this hat, I knit it in one day. I would say a total of 8 hours of knitting. So I did spend almost the whole day. The pattern title is 2018 Winter Games Hat by Susan Rainey. Like I said, I used Cascade 220, not the superwash, the regular I got it from Webb's. It's about $9 a skein without a discount. And it has some 3-color knitting in it. And I love knitting it. It came out really nice, pretty even. a little tight where my 3-color knitting is. You could feel it's a little tighter, but the blocking helped ease that up a bit. Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to be happy with it. There was just a little bleeding with the blue, the navy blue. The bath water was a little blue, but even if you look closely at the white, it didn't really, you can see my jog there. It didn't really affect the white. So we're good. So those are my 2 finished objects. I can show you really quick because I have it right here. My Jamelah Sweater by Isabel Kramer, knitted up in Knit Picks, Wool of the Andes, Tweed, and Simply Wool. Great combo. I was worried about the amount of ease that I have currently going on because I tried it on and it seemed really full. But I think I'm just going to leave it and let it do what it's doing. It's a little scrunched up because knitting against it here, but let me see if I can open it up a little for you. I'm about just under the chest. I am doing just an inch on each side of waist shaping right around here, and then I will come back out. I will add the stitches back in when I get down by my hips. I am going to have this rest just above my hip bones, but I do have I am wide in the bottom. I have wide hips, so I'm gonna put those stitches back in. But I have a tiny waist, and so this sweater is knit with. I think I did let me check my notes. Hold on. I did a size 51 inch chest. My chest size is actually 48. Oh no, I'm doing 60 inch. So 10 inches of ease. A little more than 10 inches of ease. My chest is 48 inches. Depends on what day. So it's going to be really baggy down at the bottom because, like I said, I have a tiny waist compared to my hips, in proportion to my hips. So anyway, this is going along good. And my sock, my second sock. I do not suffer from second sock syndrome. Let me show it to you. These are the only 2 patterns really I'm knitting on now. This is the Roots pattern from the Socks 2018. Here's where the second sock is. Definitely going much faster. There we go. Get that string. That's a little more purpley. It's definitely more of a dusty pink. And you can tell it looks bigger down here because of the seed stitch edges, but that will come out with the blocking. I think I showed you last week the blocked finished sock. Really looks beautiful. This is blocked because it has cables. So better there, right? Going a lot faster, the second sock, as usual. The second sock always goes faster. And I'm so enjoying it. I really am loving this pattern. But today I was reading, I stopped at the local yarn store yesterday. There's a new one in Mount Kisco, which is on my way home from work. And I bought all 3 Helene magazines and put my dibs on the 4th one, which they haven't gotten yet. That was a big expense, and I probably shouldn't have done it, but I've been reading them today while I knit. So I've been working on this because I can work on this and not look. I can read and do this because I'm just doing a stockinette stitch all the way around. So that's, just my brief update since last week. So, and again, I probably wouldn't have podcast except for the fact that I wanted to show you those 2 finished objects that I'll be giving away this week. And I'm jumping on the Stranded Colorwork wagon. So, and I wanted to talk about it because I usually, I don't want to call it, it's not politics, but I usually don't say a lot about anything controversial or opinionated. And I am not an expert, but I have a lot of knitting experience and I'm pretty good at it. I know a lot of techniques pretty well. And I've taken a lot of classes. I've gone to Meg Swanson's knitting camp. I just, I'm a pretty good resource, okay? I don't do a lot of tutorials, but I have put some up there with fixing things and, you've seen my colorwork projects. I've even designed a sweater with colorwork in it. I designed a cowl with colorwork in it, which is free, by the way, if you're interested. It started on Reindeer Knits Podcast, which I love her podcast, by the way. So I'm listening to her podcast, and she's saying how, talking about color dominance, this is the first time it came to my attention, and some of you might be going, I know what she's going to talk about. But she was talking about color dominance, and she's Norwegian, and she said, in Norway, there is no such thing as color dominance. You simply have bad tension. And she said this in a nice way, and I just want to say as well that the title of this episode is totally said in jest, in a joking manner, and very lighthearted manner. She said that she agrees with the Arnie and Carlos way of thinking about stranded color work where, there is no such thing as yarn dominance. It's bad tension. And I was like, oh, well, let me check out what Arnie and Carlos have to say. And I watched their video about it, and I have to say, at first I was really kind of ticked off. And I'm like, who do they think they are talking about other knitters that way? And I was like in my head preparing all these things I was going to say about their comments on a recording, which I'm not going to, because after watching more of their videos, I truly feel that they were in no way trying to make anyone feel wrong or inadequate. They were just expressing or trying to make a point which actually has some validity. Then I stumbled upon, I think it was in the recommended, it's not a podcast per se, but it's a YouTube video by Paper Tiger. She did a video called Let's Talk About Stranded Knitting, and it's a Q&A kind of format, and it is fabulous. So I just wanted to say that go ahead, if you haven't, and watch the Arnie and Carlos videos. You'll fall in love with them just like I did. I've heard of them before, but I didn't follow anything by them. But after watching some of their videos, I can say that they seem like really wonderful people and really care about helping people improve their knitting and sharing their skills and knowledge. But Paper Tigers, who is Dianna Walla, I think her last name's Walla. I wrote it down. Yeah, Dianna Walla. Her video is a must-see. Even if you're experienced and have done a lot of color work, you should go watch her video. It's just so great. And then you'll watch her Norwegian wool video, which is also great. So please go check her out. So anyway, she talked about a couple of things, and what I want to jump on that wagon, and I'll preface this by saying I am nowhere near her caliber in sharing or discussing this, but I do kind of have some things I think I can add to what she shared. So she was answering a lot of questions. One was on yarn dominance and tension in stranded color work, and she demonstrated very, very well that there is yarn dominance and why, even if you have a really good tension. And she also talked about wrapping the yarn. So those are two things I want to expand on, only because she demonstrated it on DPNs, and she demonstrated her technique with holding both the yarns in her left hand. So when I do stranded knitting, I hold yarn in my left and right hand. And I basically wanted to show you two things. I wanted to show you how to wrap the yarn that's in your right hand, because she demonstrates it from a different technique, and I can show you how to do it if you're holding one color in your right hand and one color in your left. Now, I want to also say that normally I don't pay attention to what color's in what hand for yarn dominance. I just make sure I knit the whole thing with this consistently. So with the same color groupings in the same hand the whole project. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's say you're knitting, this is my left hand here. I don't know how the video is going to show it on the right or the left, but this is my left hand, and you're knitting across, and now you want to wrap or trap this white yarn, which is in my right hand, because you still have a lot more stitches to do with the blue. What you do is you go around as if you're going to knit. You wrap it around the needle just as if you're going to knit, but you don't pull it through. And then you do the same with the blue. You grab it as if you're going to, I have to move my hand. You grab it as if you're going to pull it through as a continental knitter. But before you do, you take your white yarn and you unwrap it. And now you'll see, if I move my hand, that it's caught by the blue. And then you knit with your blue. And there's the white. Let me do that again. I'll just knit a few blues. I dropped a stitch. So again, I apologize for my setup, but I don't have a camera that I can, any way to set up a camera above my hands. And my husband's not here to be a cameraman, so let's see. You put the needle in as if you're going to knit, and you wrap the white yarn or the yarn in your right hand as if you're going to knit. And then you grab the left hand yarn as if you're going to knit and unwrap the right hand yarn, and then finish your knit stitch. Here it is on the front. Okay, so that is one thing I wanted to show you. The other thing I wanted to show you, she was asked a question about how do you carry your yarn when you are changing needles. And she knits, like I said, with the 4 DPNs, and she said specifically, I can't speak to if you're magic looping. Well, I do knit my color work most of the time, all the time, in magic loop. So I wanted to show you what I do or how I handle that. Sometimes I do nothing. Okay, so I'm going to act like I'm changing yarn. So I have the white yarn in my right hand and the left, and the blue in my left. And you can see here that the white yarn is fairly close to the end. So there's no need to worry about really the tension because it's only going a very small space. However, if my yarn were like further back, what I usually do is before I change the needle, just 2 stitches before I change the needle, I'll wrap it here so that it is wrapped tight. And when I go ahead and I start knitting on the new needle, which I'm going to do, you don't get any gaps. The other thing I wanted to point out that someone that knits on DPNs will not think about, and it's important to keep in mind if you are a magic loop knitter, is when you change needles, and I'm just going to put these over on this side for a second so I can show you better, and I hope the blue yarn demonstrates this. Look at the stitches on the cord here, right? When you change your needle and you're pulling on the tension, you are pulling this stitch tight around the cable. And that will compensate for any gap that you have behind the needles because you're switching needles. So normally, especially if you're on DPNs, your stitch will retain the diameter of the needle. But because on Magic Loop, it is no longer on the needle, the stitches you're leaving will get pulled tighter. So if you have a little extra float, a little extra gap in your float when you're switching needles, that's desirable. And so, like I said, I might just grab it right before I switch needles just to have it close. But even if you don't, you should be okay because you're pulling these stitches tighter, the ones on the cable, and that will compensate for any extra yarn you have in your float. However, if your float is way back, it might not be enough. So another thing to consider when you're switching is how you hold your needles. So if the yarn is way back here and you do it, you're going to pull the yarn together and it's going to decrease the float. So what you want to do is after you do that first stitch, just make sure you pull on this side a little. Remember she said, Dianna says in her video, one of the best tips to maintain a good tension is to spread out your knitting on your right hand needle every now and then. And that holds true for this as well. That you need to, when you have a long float behind and you're switching needles in Magic Loop, you need to pull the other stitches that are on the cable so that they're nice and stretched out. Okay. But basically the biggest trick is to just capture the float no matter how many stitches you've done. Capture the float of the other yarn right before you switch needles in Magic Loop. So one more thing I wanted to talk to you about is yarn dominance when you are a left and right hand knitter. So I'm going to show you the hat again. So there's a couple of things I want to point out. Let me put my hand in the hat. I knit this section with the blue in my right hand and the white in my left. And this is blocked and stretched a bit. Same with the red. The red was in my left hand, the blue was in my right. So the blue was in my right hand the whole hat. And then when I knit the 3 colors together, I haven't done a project with 3 colors. So I used this pattern as a chance to try that out. And what I did was, at first I tried holding the red and the white in my right hand on the same finger, and that wasn't working. The red kept becoming way too loose. So then I tried doing it in the right hand. What I ended up with was I held the white in my left, the blue in my right, and then I just put the red down when I wasn't using it. And I made sure on rows where there was a lot of space that I captured the floats. So right about here, I captured the float because you can see on those rows there's a lot of space between the red stitches. Now, so just keep in mind, again, the white is on my left side and the blue is on my right. Then, and this is a swatch, this is a blocked swatch. This is the other way around. And let's see if I can, I'm going to take the needle out because I'm not going to demonstrate anything anymore. But I especially want you to look at, just on the little swatch, just look at the middle stitches, because the ones on the edge are going to be super loose because the way the yarn is hanging. I don't see much difference. Do you see much difference? I don't see much difference. In some cases, I actually tend to think that this looks better. Dianna talks about how you should hold the dominant yarn in your left hand and the background yarn in your right. And I typically, like I said, don't pay attention to that and just hold the color I'm going to knit with the most in my left hand, because that's my knitting hand, my normal knitting hand. I'm continental, I'm not a thrower. The reason I get away with this and that my tension looks fairly even on both sides is that I knit so loose with my right hand that it compensates for it not being underneath. Does that make sense? So it basically makes up for when your yarn's underneath, there's more yarn, so that it kind of lets the stitch plump up more and shows more. So when I knit tight with my left hand, this is my left hand, and looser with my right, I'm making up for it. And I wanted to show you just this example. Again, like this is held the opposite way as recommended by Dianna Walla of Paper Tiger. So this is, and I'm not pulling on it, this is with the dominant color in the left hand, right hand, and the background or the blue in the left. So white right, blue left. This is white left, blue right. Not much difference. However, I want to show you. So this is where the stitches, this is a worsted weight. It's going to show up more on worsted weight. I want to show you something else. So here, this is why it doesn't matter for me. So what I wanted to say, I guess the point I'm trying to make is you need to swatch. If you hold a color in each hand, you need to swatch both ways to figure out where you need to hold your dominant color, because your tension is different. And I go back to what Arnie and Carlos were trying to say, is that the reason I can do that is because my tension in each hand is so different on each end of the spectrum that I can get away with it. Now, I want to show you something else. This is the swatch for the sweater I'm wearing. It's an Alice Starmore sweater with her yarn. And by the way, I think I knit this on a size 2 needle. It's fingering weight yarn. And these stitches on the top, they're not even bound off. They're just live stitches that I did this in 2008. I swatched for this sweater. And these stitches have never come out, because this is like a Shetland wool. So I wanted to make a point that with Shetland wool or sticky wools, you're going to have less of a problem with yarn dominance. And I wanted to show you the back so you can see what I mean. See how even all those floats are? It's because this yarn is not going to slide over itself. So even though one might be underneath and there might be a little more yarn used when knitting that color, it's not going to slide over the other yarn or under the other yarn to plump up the stitch because it's stuck where it is. So this yarn, which is a bit more slippery, that will slide a little. So I wanted to point that out. And I also wanted to talk about one more thing. I'm sure all of you have heard of the Fruity Knitting Podcast, and when she knits Colorwork, she traps the float of every stitch. And that is what I've done when I knit my Philosopher wool sweater. It's not what I do when I knit other sweaters, but that also will affect yarn dominance because for that, it won't matter which hand ever. You can switch in the middle of a project, whatever, because every single stitch is going to be held tight. So I wore this sweater because I wanted to show you underneath. Let me take it off. The floats. See how even the floats are. Some are long, some are short. When your yarn's sticky like this, don't worry about catching floats because your finger won't get under anything. I hardly ever trap floats, by the way. Hardly ever. Usually just with, like, if it's more than 2 inches, maybe I might. If the yarn is sticky, especially. Now I want to show you my Philosopher wool sweater where I trapped every single float of every single stitch. This makes for a much thicker fabric and much less drape. But here it is. I don't know if you can see it because I can't see my screen, but it's more like a woven fabric than a back of a Fair Isle fabric. So with this, you don't have to worry about dominance ever. And you can switch hands with the colors throughout. Whereas when I knit something like this or this hat, the key is to just continuity for me. But you need to do a swatch and you need to switch which hand you hold the colors in so you can find out if you need to do the same. So, yeah, that's just my 2 cents. And I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to make it look like I know more than someone else. I just wanted to add to what Dianna did because I think it's worth knowing. And, yeah, and that's I didn't say enough about stranded knitting. I just realized I forgot to talk to you about one thing that I think is important enough that I'm recording a little video that I am going to stick into the podcast somewhere. And it's this. I wanted to mention this book. It's knitting with 2 colors, and it's by Meg Swanson and Amy Deachin. If you don't know who they are, I'd be very surprised. But if you haven't heard of them, Meg Swanson is Elizabeth Zimmerman's daughter, and Amy Deachin is her friend and has been working with her for, I really don't know how many years, but Amy basically runs the knitting camp that Meg does with her. Amy's there the whole time and Meg makes appearances, but Amy is also a very amazing knitter and she's also worked for the Knit Circus Yarns. So the reason I wanted to bring up this book is I think that this book, or I can assure you that this book is the only book you will need for colorwork knitting references. And I'll take a look and I'll show you the table of contents here. Actually, it doesn't go into a lot of detail, but basically it talks about getting started, talks about trapping the wools, okay, and it recommends either doing a sleeve or a hat as a swatch so that you can use whatever it is that you've made. And if you do a sleeve, it would have to be from the cuff up, just to keep that in mind. It talks about the importance of gauge. And this is something I forgot to talk about because I am a victim of this. And that's one of the reasons I wore this sweater. It's really hard to get gauge sometimes, right? We all know that. And a lot of times to get the stitch gauge we need, we ignore our row gauge and compensate by knitting extra rows or something like that. With stranded knitting, it's really important to get both, but sometimes you can't. And I'm going to stand up and show you. I started this sweater in 2008, and admittingly, I am admitting to you that I was about 40 pounds lighter back then. My bust was smaller, I was smaller, so just keep that in mind, but also look and see how short it is. It barely comes to the top of my jeans. Right? It's the top of my jeans. Well, a little below. But it's much shorter than I had wanted it to be. Here's the back. The back, it rides up a bit. So the reason is I have a very square stitch. When I knit sterile, my stitches are very square, whereas most stitches are rectangular. And I didn't pay attention to row gauges. They give an example of that here. And they show how some people have these square squat stitches and some people have these long, tall stitches. Pay attention to row gauge. It's very important whether you're knitting a cardigan like this with an all-over pattern or if you're knitting something that is just stranded in a yoke, because it will affect your sleeve, your armhole size, and it will affect how it fits on your chest. So keep that in mind. You might have to, in my case, I might have had to, I could have probably knit just a whole another repeat of the chart. But if your chart is really big, like in my other sweater I'm knitting, the chart is like 60 rows, the Colorwork chart. So you might just add a little more length to your border. And look at my sleeve. Look at my sleeve. I actually settled for it thinking, well, I can get away with saying that it's a 3/4 length. But really it was supposed to be down here. And I was just too excited to be done to pay attention to that. So I'm telling you to pay attention to row gauge. And here they talk about ways you can compensate for that and how to deal with that and how to adjust patterns. They talk about resizing things. They talk about different ways to cast on for Colorwork. They talk about the garment construction. They talk about different borders you can add. And then one of the best tips ever is when you're changing colors, especially in something like this. I think I am like fading. The colors are so blended that you can spit splice them when you get near your steek. And just keep knitting. No one will ever know. And then you have no ends to weave in. And that's the best thing I ever did. Also, always change colors at your steek, because you're cutting that. You know, and the other thing is, I cut my steek unreinforced. This is Shetland wool. It has never ever come apart. I'll show you that again. I cut my steek completely unreinforced. This is about, I finished it in like 2013. That's 5 years ago, and I wear it a lot. And here's my steek, and you can see where I cut it, and you can see it has never ever come apart. So, this is Shetland wool. So I'm just saying, you don't have to do anything with Shetland wool. Other thing that I wanted to say about this book, and I swear, it addresses everything. Increases, decreases, how to work the armholes, how to pick up stitches, borders, button bands. But the best thing is they give you the formula for a yoke sweater, and you could make your own yoke sweater. If you have a good Fair Isle pattern book like this one, make up whatever you want. You don't have to buy all these patterns. This is all you need to make your own yoke sweater. And you remember Ellie was talking about her, what's that cardigan by Boiler Knits? The one that's too tight. It's beautiful, but all the increases were done above the shoulders and below the yoke, and a lot of people have complained about it. But you can fix things like this with that percentage system. So I highly recommend Knitting with Two Colors by Meg Swanson and Amy Deacon. And that's what I wanted to add. I swear by it. I swear it's the only book you will need. All right.